When people talk about badge engineering, they usually think of General Motors. And if you have ever seen a 1982 Chevrolet Celebrity, Pontiac 6000, Oldsmobile Cutlass Ciera, and Buick Century parked side by side, you might have shaken your head too. They look so similar. It's as if GM just swapped the badges and sold the same car under 4 different names. That's why many believe GM was trying to fool customers, cut costs, use one design across multiple brands, and hope no one notices. But the truth might surprise you, because behind those seemingly identical lines, GM spent a staggering amount of money to create differences no one ever noticed. And that is the most fascinating part of the story. A tale of careful design efforts buried under false assumptions. We are about to peel back each metal panel, each crease line, to reveal the truth. A truth even more shocking than what you saw on the cover of Fortune magazine in 1983. In reality, the concept of parts sharing is nothing new. Long before the term badge engineering became popular, American automakers were already looking for ways to optimize costs by using the same mechanical platforms across different vehicle lines. And General Motors was the master at this. Going back to 1959, under pressure from Chrysler's forward-look models launched in 1957, GM was forced to redesign its entire lineup in an extremely short time. They did not have enough time and budget to create unique components for each brand. The solution was to share a wide range of parts, such as windshields, roof panels, front doors, rear glass, and even inner doors, between Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac. Yet, what is remarkable is that despite sharing so many details, each model still retained its own identity. A 1959 Cadillac could never be mistaken for a Chevrolet. The differences came from the front end, the wheel arches, the bumpers, the tail lights, and the body lines. If you need an example showing that parts sharing does not erase identity, just look at the legendary trio: the Oldsmobile Toronado, the Buick Riviera, and the Cadillac Eldorado of the 1960s. These 3 cars shared many important mechanical and body components. The windshield, the A-pillars, and the front door glass were identical. The Toronado and Riviera even shared the roof panel and the rear glass. However, each still carried a very distinct design style, impossible to confuse. One interesting detail lies in the hood. The Toronado used a trapped hood with 3 cut lines, creating a bold and sporty effect. Meanwhile, the Riviera and Eldorado used wrap-over hoods, simpler and more cost-effective. The irony is that the Toronado was the cheaper model among the 3, yet it had the most expensive hood design. This shows that GM was willing to spend money to differentiate each brand, even when they shared the same foundation. But not every parts-sharing attempt by GM was a success. One of the clearest examples of a mismatch between engineering and aesthetics came from Buick's station wagons in the late 1970s. At that time, GM used a common front door design across its station wagons, based on the Ford Capri. That was a reasonable decision from a production standpoint, but Buick insisted on keeping its own distinctive front-end styling, and that created a break in the overall design. Because the door shape did not align with the front fender, GM had to add a triangular plastic insert ahead of the side mirrors to cover the floor. The result was an awkward patch detail, right where the driver could see it most clearly. Buick was known for its elegant image and solid finish, but that plastic piece made the wagon look cheap and disjointed. It was like an expensive suit, awkwardly patched with mismatched fabric. When entering the 1980s, General Motors faced pressure to downsize cars to meet increasingly strict fuel economy regulations. But they stumbled into a paradox. Americans were already accustomed to large sedans with imposing lines and upright C-pillars. If the cars became too small, customers would feel disappointed. And so GM chose a very specific design philosophy, the three-box language. Every car was divided into three clear sections: a long square hood, a passenger cabin with upright windows, and a separate trunk, also squared off. From A bodies like the Chevrolet Celebrity, Pontiac 6000, and Buick Century to C bodies like the Oldsmobile 98 and Buick Electra, all followed this formula. The most recognizable feature was the upright C-pillar. It conveyed solidity, formality, and evoked memories of the large Cadillacs and Buicks of the 1960s. While the Ford Taurus and Mercury Sable chose a rounded jelly bean shape, GM held on to tradition. They wanted smaller cars that still gave customers the feeling of driving a serious automobile. That is why, in the first year, many GM models still sold strongly. This design struck the psychology of Americans at the time, even though today we see them as boxy and old-fashioned. And if you want a clear example of how the three-box philosophy was applied, none illustrates it better than the 1982 Chevrolet Celebrity. At first glance, the Celebrity looked like a typical mid-size sedan. But upon closer inspection, you could see how GM carefully created distinctions. The hood was stamped into three distinct surfaces, with two crease lines running from the base of the windshield to the front, then fading out. This was not a shared detail, but a unique Chevrolet trait. The front fender was also treated differently. The wheel arch had a wide, flat surface, allowing trim moldings on certain versions, while the joint with the header panel carried a subtle reverse cut. These small details gave the Celebrity a solid face, familiar with Chevrolet's styling that customers recognized. What is notable is that these changes required unique stamping, dyes, and additional costs, while the average user hardly noticed. But that was exactly how GM wanted Chevrolet to keep its own identity. And when compared to the Oldsmobile Cutlass Ciera or the Pontiac 6000, those differences became even clearer. Oldsmobile was aimed at customers seeking calmness and maturity, so the Ciera was shaped with smooth surfaces, rounded wheel arches, and crease lines that stopped neatly before the wheels. Overall, the Ciera gave off a softer impression than the Celebrity, like a refined version for those who valued traditional luxury. The Pontiac 6000 chose the opposite expression. Its hood stretched all the way to the grille, completely eliminating the three-surface feel of the Celebrity. The fender was emphasized with a strong crease running through, seamlessly connected to the fascia. The rounded wheel arch created a sporty feel, highlighting the youthful character Pontiac promoted in the 1980s. The common point was that both the Ciera and the 6000 were based on the same mechanical foundation, but the treatment of details made them stand clearly apart. One represented restraint, the other energy. This proves that GM truly worked to turn each brand into its own story. And with the Buick Century, that investment was taken to the highest level. The most noticeable feature was the Century's front wheel arch, which was larger and sharper. It was not just a simple rounded circle, but was combined with a flat surface that extended into the front bumper. This detail required a completely unique fender, which could not be reused from Chevrolet or Oldsmobile. The Century's hood was also unique. Instead of keeping the three flat surfaces like the Celebrity or the neat stamping of the Ciera, the Century had a raised crease running down the center, giving a sense of authority and solidity. This small detail also forced Buick to design a completely separate panel under the windshield, entirely different from the other A-body models. This was the perfect example of GM's luxury in detail strategy. They were willing to spend money so the Century could carry Buick's strong identity, even if ordinary users could hardly notice it. But that very attention to detail made the Century different, at least in the eyes of those who looked closely at every crease and every panel of metal. And when observing the body, it became even clearer that GM did not hold back on differentiation. All A-body models shared the same glass and upper door frames, but the outer skins were completely unique. On the Century, the doors were stamped with a slight curve downward, giving a heavy and solid impression. In contrast, the Pontiac 6000 had a horizontal crease running the full length of the doors, seamlessly flowing into the front fender. Meanwhile, the Cutlass Ciera chose flatter, calmer surfaces, suitable for buyers who valued tradition. To stay consistent with the front fenders, GM had to redesign the rear wheel arches as well. The Century had sharp, wide arches. The Cieras were rounder, and Pontiac emphasized strong, athletic curves. This meant each car needed its own stamping dies, significantly driving up costs. Even the deck lids were not the same. Chevrolet followed a simple approach. Oldsmobile added a subtle crease at the edge, while Buick and Pontiac made the rear stand out with bold, pronounced stampings. These were differences that the average buyer would hardly notice, but they reflected GM's effort to let each brand tell its own story. When moving into the X-body and C-body, GM's strategy of differences within sameness became even clearer. At first glance, models like the Oldsmobile Omega, Chevrolet Citation II, Pontiac Phoenix, or Buick Skylark seemed difficult to distinguish. But when observed closely, each small detail carried its own mark. For example, the Citation II had a squircle wheel arch, half round, half square, along with a horizontal crease running down the body. The Omega also used this type of wheel arch, but sharper and thicker, giving a more upscale impression. The Skylark chose round arches, with pronounced lips for a sturdier look, while the Phoenix combined round arches with a vertical crease that flowed into the front fascia, creating a seamless and unmistakable appearance. With the C-body, the differences were even more apparent. The Cadillac DeVille, Buick Electra, and Oldsmobile 98 looked almost identical when parked side by side, to the point that Lincoln once ran an advertisement mocking them. But beneath the surface, they were nearly completely different. Cadillac used aircraft-style doors that cut into the roof, while Buick opted for a clamshell hood, and Oldsmobile used a traditional hood. These details required unique engineering mechanisms, costly but accepted by GM to preserve brand identity. The issue was that such subtle differences were not easily noticed by ordinary buyers, and this led to a bigger question. If GM had made so much effort, why did customers still believe they were simply swapping badges? The key lay in how customers perceived the cars. Walking into a dealership, buyers did not bring rulers or inspect each stamping line. They saw the overall shape, the boxy silhouette, the upright C-pillar, and the familiar three-box design. And to most consumers, the Celebrity, Ciera, 6000, or Century all looked the same. The media at the time also reinforced this impression. The 1983 Fortune magazine cover placed the four A-body models side by side, with the headline, "GM Look-alike." That image stayed in the public's mind, making them believe GM simply changed the badge and sold the same car again. Few knew that beneath the similar surfaces, each brand had its own panels, its own hood, and even its own quarter panels. Another reason was the driving experience. Despite exterior differences, the engines and transmissions were largely the same. A driver stepping into a Pontiac 6000 and then trying a Chevrolet Celebrity would feel they drove almost identically. This mechanical sameness made it easier for customers to label them as rebadged. In the end, GM's biggest problem in the 1980s was not design. In fact, the A-body, X-body, and C-body cars sold extremely well in their first years. The Chevrolet Citation reached more than 800,000 units, and the Oldsmobile 98 sold 140,000 cars, far surpassing even praised competitors like the Mercury Sable. This shows that GM's three-box design and familiar language truly met customer expectations. But that success quickly collapsed. Recall campaigns, engineering flaws, and poor build quality destroyed GM's image. Consumers could accept cars that looked somewhat similar as long as they were reliable. Once that trust was lost, they turned away, no matter how much money GM had spent creating differences in sheet metal and body lines. The story of GM's badge engineering was therefore not simply about changing logos. It reflected a paradox. The company invested enormously in making differences, but failed at the most important point. When quality did not go along with design, every effort became meaningless. And that is the greatest lesson the automotive industry still recalls to this day. If you have ever driven or witnessed any of the A-body or C-body models from this period, please share your story in the comments. Do you think GM was truly just swapping badges, or were they misunderstood? I would love to hear your perspective. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss other fascinating classic car stories.